You are very like her, Silverin said, in the ways that matter, in the quality of your attention, and in the honesty that lives below the reserve. Those are good things to carry forward. Elia looked at the wolf for a long moment, taking in the great silver coat, the measured eyes, the enormous presence that was entirely peaceful and not even slightly fearsome, the sense of a being that had accumulated so much time and so much observing that it had come out the far side of all drama into something vast and still and genuinely, deeply, effortlessly kind. He felt as though he were memorizing something that he would need to return to. He was. "I will come back," he said. "Not because I need permission, but because I want to." "That," Silverin said, with the quality his voice carried when it was expressing something he considered important, "is the right reason." Elia turned and walked out into the meadow. The grass was cool and wet with night dew beneath his feet, soaking slowly through his boots, and the air of the open meadow was different from the forest air, wider, less complex, carrying the smell of crushed grass and distant smoke from the palace fires. He walked slowly, and he did not look back immediately, because the moment seemed to ask for a certain kind of forward motion, a certain trust that what was behind him was still there, even without constant checking. When he was perhaps 100 steps into the meadow, he did turn. He looked back at the edge of the duskwood, dark and enormous under the stars. He could not see Silverin. The wolf was no longer at the tree line, or not visibly so. He had merged back into the forest the way he had emerged from it, without drama, simply present and then simply absent, as the forest itself chose. And yet Elia did not feel the absence as loss. The forest stood there enormous and patient and full, and within it, somewhere in the blue-gray quiet beside the silver river and the bioluminescent moss and the midnight blooming flowers, an ancient silver wolf was present, would continue to be present, had been present for 777 years, would be present for whatever came next. Elia turned back toward the palace and walked on, and the stars were above him all the way. He slipped back into the palace through the kitchen garden just before the first gray of dawn began to soften the edge of the sky in the east. The celebration had wound down. The courtyards were quieter now, only a few servants moving about with low lamps clearing the remnants of the night. No one noticed a prince returning from an unannounced walk. No one had noticed he was gone. This was, he thought, both the sadness and the strange gift of invisibility. Sometimes the unseen can move freely in ways the watched cannot. He climbed the tower stairs slowly and entered his room, which was cool and undisturbed. The candle on the writing table burned to a stub, the window he had left unlatched now letting in the night air. He sat down at the window and looked out at the sky, which was beginning its almost imperceptible shift from the black of deep night to the deep blue that comes just before dawn, the color of thought itself, the color of the moment between sleeping and waking. He thought about his mother, walking out from this same palace through this same dark, finding her way to the same forest, sitting on the root of the same oak, and speaking to the same silver wolf about her fears for the child she was carrying. 17 years ago. The thought of it was so near and so far away simultaneously that it sat in his chest like something both weightless and entirely substantial. Like light, he thought, like early morning light. He thought about what Silverin had said, the acceptable version of yourself is not a safe place to live. He turned the words over slowly, examining them from different angles the way he had examined the wolf's amber gaze, not with the urgency of someone seeking to solve something, but with the patience of someone who understands that some truths need to be lived with rather than solved. He would be king one day. He would sit in the great chair at the head of the long table and make decisions that affected thousands of lives, and advisors would speak around him and expectation would press from every direction, and the crown, when it eventually came, would sit on the same head that had tonight sat at the edge of a forest in a simple gray cloak, crying quietly in the company of an ancient wolf who had known his mother. Both of those things were true. Both of those selves were his. He did not have to choose between them. He thought he might begin, very quietly and without announcement, to let the second one exist more openly. Not in rebellion, not in dramatic declaration, but in the small, continuous ways that matter most. In listening rather than performing, in asking honest questions rather than approved ones, in making room inside himself for his own thoughts before he submitted them to the judgments of others, in coming back, when he needed to the edge of the duskwood, in remembering that somewhere inside that forest, in the patient dark, an ancient and silver and unfrightening presence was watching over what his mother had loved. He thought about her finally, without the armoring of distance he usually applied to the thought of her. Really thought about her. Let her be real and close, a person rather than a gap. A girl of 15, sitting where he had sat, with gray eyes like his. A young woman walking through the forest alone, finding something there that the palace could not give her. A mother sitting beside the silver river in the blue dark, telling a 760-year-old wolf that she was afraid for the child she was carrying. The love in that fear, the sheer, unconditional, forward-reaching love of a mother for a person who had not yet arrived in the world, moved through him now in a way it never had before, because he had never before had the evidence of it so specifically placed in his hands. She had loved him before she knew him. She had asked someone to watch for him. She had left him, in a way, the forest itself, the gift of a place where he could be unguarded, where the night air and the silver river and the ancient patient wisdom of a wolf named Silverin would be waiting. The sky in the east was now genuinely lightening, a slow gray-gold warmth beginning at the horizon, spreading upward with the unhurried certainty of something that does not need to hurry, because its arrival is not in question. Elia watched it. Somewhere deep in the duskwood, the pale violet midnight flowers were closing, one by one, folding their petals against the arrival of light, keeping their midnight secrets safe until the next darkness. The owl that had called in the near clearing had gone silent. The forest would be settling into its daytime quiet, different from its night quiet, but quiet still, the way the forest was always quiet, the way Silverin was always quiet, a quietness that was not absence but abundance. Elia rested his forearms on the window ledge and looked out at the rising day and felt, for the first time in a very long time, perhaps for the first time in his remembering life, a feeling that he recognized after a moment as something adjacent to peace. Not the false peace of numbness, and not the temporary peace of distraction, but the genuine quietness that comes when something has been seen clearly, named honestly, and allowed to be what it is. He was lonely, and he had been lonely for a long time, and the loneliness was real, and it was not his fault, and it did not mean he was wrong or broken. He was 17 years old, and his mother had loved him, and there was an ancient wolf in the forest that had been watching for him by request for all 17 of those years. He was a prince who would one day be a king, and he was also a boy who sat in empty rooms listening to his own thoughts, and both of those things were allowed to be true simultaneously. He was not finished yet. He was, in fact, very near the beginning. He stayed at the window until the sun had fully cleared the horizon, and the palace around him was beginning to fill with the sounds of morning, footsteps in corridors, the distant ring of something metal, a voice calling something to someone across a courtyard below. The world resuming itself, as it always did, with its demands and its noise and its 1,000 requirements. He would meet those requirements, as he always had. But he would meet them now with something he had not had yesterday, a specific, lived, real knowledge that outside the palace walls, the meadow stretched to the forest, and the forest opened around the silver river, and somewhere in the quiet dark of that ancient wood, a wolf with amber eyes that had known his mother was waiting with the patience of a being that has learned that time is not a pressure, but a gift, and that everything worth meeting will eventually arrive if one is still enough and present enough and genuinely enough there to receive it. He pushed back from the window. He straightened his gray cloak. He breathed in the morning. And then, carrying with him the forest and the river and the old wolf's voice and his mother's love reaching across the years to find him where she had always hoped it would, Elia walked back into his life, which was, he now understood, only just beginning to become truly his.